Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodread, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with Lucas Parks, the author of Scars. It's a pleasure to have Lucas Parks featured on P English Literature. Hi there, Lucas.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on the show, man. I've been looking forward to it. And hey, I got to tell you, I love your channel. I love all your videos and the reviews that you're doing. Thanks for all of that, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm so excited to speak with you so you can share with us, Scars. So without wasting much time, I'd love to move straight into the interview. And when I read through your book, Scars, I was enthralled with it. It's very emotional. And a lot of poems there that, get me enthralled that I had to invite you on the show so you can share with us some of the stories and poems in it. So I was going to ask you, how did this book come about? What inspired, Scars?
Oh, thank you for finding interest in the book. Scars wasn't ever planned. So I've always used writing as a form of coping or, a therapeutic outlet for my emotions. I suffer with PTSD, depression, and suicidal thoughts. And I grew up in an abusive home, and I watched a kid shoot himself in my teenage years. And I ended up meeting a counselor who told me that I should just write my emotions out. And I've always been dyslexic and very illiterate. And so I've always struggled with things like spelling or reading. But, talking with that therapist, he said it doesn't matter what you do with this writing. It just matters that you don't let it set inside you and become toxic. And so my wife, when we got together, she would notice that I would stay up late at night when I was dealing with the symptoms of PTSD, and I would just write, and I'd write all night. I'd stay up all night by myself in the quiet, and I'd just get all my emotions out, write them down. And she ended up reading some of my writing, and she told me it was poetry. And I kind of laughed at it and shrugged it off because, like I said, I struggle with spelling. And she ended up bringing me some literature written by Edgar Allan Poe. And I ended up reading The Raven, and I connected so much to that poetry because I loved how dark it was, but I could still see the underlining light that was there. And I thought, if I can relate so well to Edgar Allan Poe's emotions, and I could feel comforted by what Edgar Allan Poe was writing, that maybe there was a way for me to help others with my writing. So my wife encouraged me to post something on Facebook, and I was very nervous to do that. I didn't feel comfortable with sharing my writing or my emotions or my dark thoughts. And I ended up mustering up the courage, and I found a group, and I posted it to the group, and it got over 300 reactions, and I've never had any post ever get that many reactions. So then I saw this way that I could help others relate to their struggles and their traumas or their issues, and that in reading somebody else's writing, you know that you're not alone. And so then I started sharing more of my poetry and more of my writing, and I kept getting the big reactions, the 300 plus reactions, and I got real excited about it. And then me and my wife came together, and we just decided that we should put a book together. And that's how Scars became.
Wow, that's amazing. That's truly amazing. And your response to that question would make me to ask more similar question. Because when I read through this book, it is very emotional. It is empathetic. It is remorseful. It puts me in, and I was captured like a deer that is caught in headlight. And most of the works here, most of the words are very saddening nation. And I was going to ask you, could you tell us how you derive the inspiration to write most of the poems in this book?
So the inspiration for the poems that are in this book, they really come from within me. They're stories and testimonies about things that have happened to me, or life events that have shaped and molded me into who I am today. Another inspiring thing that I like to add to my poetry is trying to relate to some other people and see how they might feel in their situations. I also am very inspired by the stigma that is around mental health, and this feeling that we shouldn't talk about it and we should just keep our emotions to ourselves. I don't believe that. I think that the only way you can actually truly heal from any traumatic or depressing or any kind of mental health issue is to speak about it. And so that's really where the inspiration comes from.
Wow, I can relate to that. Just as I always say that, poetry can be likened to as a language of the soul. And most of the words that comes from poetry is something that is mostly coming from the soul of the poet that write it. And that one too made me to ask you another question. Dax, I want to specifically ask about the poem in your book in page 177. That's a poem titled My Son. While I read through this particular poem, I see that the tone of the narrator is very desperate. I said it in my review for the book. It is full of longing, it is desperate in nature, it is very arch, and it is somewhat evocative. I was going to ask you what inspired, and another thing I like to say about the poem is that it is somewhat narrative based. I don't have any idea of how it comes about, but mere reading it, I love it because I found the poem relating to that of the poems of Kohame in my own book. So I was going to ask you what inspired this particular poem titled My Son?
The poem My Son, it's a very fresh wound, so it's still pretty hard to talk about. But there's been 2 times in my life that I have had my son, 2 different sons, ripped away from me, and not by choice, but by vindictiveness or selfishness or anger. I can't speak for the women who have taken my child from me. The first time it happened, I was 16 and I got a girl pregnant, and I filed for a fraternity test when he was born, but I wasn't allowed to see him, and they ended up moving across the country as soon as I filed for the fraternity test. With that son, I didn't meet him till after he was 7 years old, when I found his mother on Facebook, and it crushed me, and it was devastating. But he's 18 now, and we have a great relationship. But recently, in the last few years, there was a girl that I got pretty involved with and interested in, and we ended up making a child together. And she was very toxic as far as being in a relationship with her. She would lie and manipulate all the time, and I would catch her in lies constantly, and I just couldn't be with her. So I ended up breaking our relationship off, but I told her that I very much wanted to be a part of my son's life, and I wanted to come to the doctor visits and everything, and she wouldn't ever let me come to the doctor visits. She let me drive her to one doctor visit, but then she got real weird and wouldn't let me go in to the doctor's office. And in hindsight, I can see that it was a ploy. And again, you'll have to forgive me. Like I said, it's still pretty fresh to talk about this. This son is 2 years old now, and again, the things that hurt about this is that I didn't get to see his first step. I didn't get to hold him. I don't get to be there with him when he feels scared or sad. I don't get to comfort him, and I want to be there, and I want to comfort him. But I took her to court, and I tried to get some visitation time with him where I could just see him a little bit. But she ended up lying to the courts and manipulating the courts, and she took my poetry and used it against me at our trial, and she would produce false evidence that wasn't even true. She would take some of my poems and she would just cut them in half so that it looked like it was darker than it actually was. And she would just try to tell the courts that I was an unfit father and I was too dangerous to be around the child. And that's honestly not true. I have all 3 of my girls here and a stepdaughter as well. And I love them all very much, and we're in a great relationship. But the thing that hurts is when couples can't make things work, and then the child gets ripped away from you. And it doesn't just hurt me. I will heal, but I know from the past relationship where my son was taken away, a fatherless society is very damaging for a child. And a child needs his father in his life. And getting back into the story about the trial that I had with her, it came to the point when, the judge was scared that I was suicidal and I had PTSD and my poetry is dark. And so the judge wanted me to do supervised visitations, but her mother and her wanted to be the supervisors. And I just had this knowledge that if they're willing to lie this much under oath in a court, that they'll lie to say whatever they have to say to keep my son from me. And I just realized that there would be no peace in my child's life. And so I ended up sacrificing my time with him, and I just gave up on the court trial. And I know a lot of people might frown on that and think that I gave up on my son, but really, I feel like I sacrificed for peace. I want my son to have peace, and as long as his mother was trying to hurt me, he would never have peace. And so that's where the poem My Son comes from. And if you look throughout the book, there's a lot of poems in there that are about how it feels from a father's perspective to lose a child. And again, like, it hurts. There's a lot of moments I miss, and there's also nothing I can do about it.
Wow, that's truly a deep reason. It is so a deep reason. Wow, that's very, very deep. Another thing I would like to ask you, Mr. Lucas, is, when I read through your book, I felt that it asks reading and it can be read interchangeably. The poem can be, there's a way you wrote it in a way that some poems can be read interchangeably from the beginning chapters to the ending chapters, and from the ending chapters also to the beginning chapters without any form of alteration in the sort of meaning that the poem, content seek to communicate or convey. And I was going to ask you, how did you see this, style as a fitting approach for poetry?
Well, addressing the rhythmic aspect of my poetry, a lot of my poems are actually, for me, lyrics, because I'll sing a poem in my head before I ever start writing it. I'll come up with 1 or 2 lines, and sometimes if I find I'm struggling to write anything, I'll just grab my guitar and start strumming a melody, and I'll come up with pretty good lines from that as far as rhythmic goes. But we're talking about reading from the top to the bottom and then the bottom to the top. That actually comes from a poem known as The Pretty Ugly. It's pretty popular on social media, and if you haven't read it, you should definitely Google The Pretty Ugly poem. It's a wonderful poem. But that's where I get the inspiration to write that way. And a lot of times, those kind of poems, they come more natural than trying to write it, making it a forceful kind of writing. If you write a poem, just take the chance or the time to read from the bottom line up and just see if it flows both ways. And I love the creativity of writing that way. I love that, one poem can have two meanings or two messages within it. That to me is just, I don't know, it's magical,
Yeah, that's good. That also sounds like a nice method. I love your answer to that. Okay, Lucas, there's another thing I want to ask you in your book. There's a particular, this book is actually very deep, and that's one of the reasons why I actually love it, because I particularly love poems that are very deep. I love poems that are extremely philosophical. I love poems that ask, gruesome words that is able to pull me in as a reader. And that wants me to ask you about a particular poem in this book titled Still Arise. Because when I read through the lyrics of Still Arise, the lines and stanzas are very deep. I don't think I will have the time to recite it, but the lines and stanzas are very deep. They are pathetic, they are heartfelt, they're extremely emotional. And I was going to ask you, because most of the lyrics, to me, I consider it as something that is not fictitious. And I was going to ask you, how did you come about writing this particular poem, Still Arise?
Still Arise is, it's inspired from my childhood abuse, and that's where it derived from. And it's the story of how childhood abuse can last a lifetime. It's a thorn in me that I will have forever. I love both of my parents, and I have forgiven them, and we have made amends, and we are great friends because of the life that we lived, be it the bad or the good. The poem Still Arise, it moves from being the child in the abuse to then being the adult having to face the damage that was done. And the reason it's titled Still Arise is because those moments still arise even today. I'm 35 years old now, and I still have those moments of fear or those emotional abusive words, like my parents telling me that I'm a failure or that I'm no good at something. It still hurts, and it's a healing journey that I'll heal from daily. There's parts in there that really describe what it's like to be the child that is being abused, when you think that these people are supposed to love me and protect me, and then that's what you start associating love with. You start associating it with the chaos and the craziness and the way that we hid things, that on the outside we looked like this amazing church-going family that had it all, but behind closed doors there was a lot of evil and a lot of secrets. Moving through the poem, you see where it becomes a testimony that says, in spite of everything that you did to me or everything that you said I was, I'm not going to be you. I'm not going to hurt my children. I'm not going to put my kids in fear. I'm going to stop the curse, the family lineage. I'm going to put an end to it. My children will never have to live in that abusive fear, There's also very, very deep wounds in the poem Still Arise. There's a part in here that says, I hope that the tree that bared the switch died, the switch that made me bleed more on the inside. You made me do push-ups in my own blood as you crucified a child that night. You know, like I said, I'm 35 and still reading that, it still hurts. But then, as I get to the end of it, it says, yet in spite of desperate, despairing, depression, I still rise. Beaten, bloody, black and blue, I never stopped loving you. I stopped loving myself. Yet despite, I will rise. And that really goes to this internal fight and this internal struggle within myself to make something of myself, to write my poetry, to tell my story, to not be ashamed of the shame that they inflicted on me. You know, putting aside all the child abuse and everything bad that happened in my life, there was a lot of good in my family, in the way that we did love each other and we were there for each other. And even though the abuse traumatized me, it still created something in me that is bold, and something that is confident, and something that sees right from wrong. And I have a deeper connection with my children as far as how I love them. I make sure that I install trust in them. I make sure that they feel safe with me, because if my past had never happened to me, I may never know what it would feel like to be that scared of your dad coming home, or your mom lying to your dad so that it takes the heat off of her when dad's mad, you know. And I hope that in sharing my story of my childhood abuse, that again somebody can relate to that, and then they can be bold, and in their own way they can still arise.
Wow. I'm deeply sorry to know about your experience. That's very, very, saddening. I'm sorry to know about your childhood experience. It's so gruesome. And another thing I would like to ask you is, while I read through Scars, I read on the beginning page that it's a book one of seven. And I was going to ask you, could you tell us more about the progress of your next publication?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the next book I'm working on is called Infection, and it's the second book in the series. In all of my books, I have a color scheme as well as a theme. If we go back and look at Scars, you'll see where love, death, and time, the words throughout the whole book, are highlighted. And that's because when you get to the end of the book, there's a message about love, death, and time. And so in Infection, the theme of it is going to revolve around fear, hate, and existence. And the reason I'm doing that is because of the way that we all hold so much fear in us and hate, and we all exist within this fear and this hate. And Infection is going to focus a lot on how fear and hate really does become an infection, and it festers. And if we don't take care of that problem, then we become the problem. And the series is actually called Genesis, and what I'm doing is I'm actually starting with the first book last. So Scars is actually the last book, but I'm starting with it first because it's going to go from my darkest moments and my traumas and all the hurt, and it's going to be a journey going all the way to the first book, which is going to be Glory. And that's going to be how the grace of God has given me wisdom and knowledge through this this experience of life, of, you know, going from the traumatic moment to the journey of healing, and then to the grace of God to accept and understand why I've gone through what I've gone through and how I've come to be better because of it and how I've healed. Yeah, and so Infection, like I said, is the next book. And I don't ever really set release dates or anything because I'm kind of a perfectionist and I like to really take my time on my books. I try to set my own goal of releasing a book a year. But other than that, there's no real set date or anything when it's going to be released. But it's a slow go, and I think it's a slow go with good reason.
Yeah, that sounds great. I really look forward to the publication of the next book. I truly cannot wait for it. Another question I would like to ask you is that, while I read through Scar, I realized that it has a kind of a distinctive tone with which the lines and the stanzas are written. Apart from the reading, the rhymes, the assonance, or the other characteristics of feature of poetry that it possesses, I find the lyrics somewhat distinctive in nature, because there's a point with which I underlined some section here, and there's a way you use your words. It's somewhat figurative, and some meaning are not just conveying right meaning, like a direct meaning, but they are somewhat idiomatic in nature. At some point whereby I underlined, I was like, without blemish, covered in pain, the sins we gave still remain. The scars that stuck still spoken today, and to this day the sun was given. That's the particular poem titled "The Lamb," and under it I underlined that it denotes sacrifice. The second stanza, at some point I underlined that it denotes power. Some of your words denote salvation. Another part of the word denotes dominion that follows. That's why I underlined it here. I don't know if it's visible to the viewers. So I was going to ask you, how did you come about this particular style? Is there a particular poem or poet that, you take your writing style to resemble? And if yes, what's the name of the poet, and how has the poet's writing style influenced yours?
So Edgar Allan Poe, he's always really been my favorite poet. I love his madness and his darkness and the way that he can intrigue and provoke a thought, the way that he can make me think outside of the box. But other than Edgar Allan Poe, I really don't have any poets that are very inspiring to me. What's inspiring to me is music, singer-songwriters, the way that they can give you an emotion to relate with. And like I said before, a lot of my rhythmic and rhyme schemes, they come because my poetry has a melody behind it. When I was growing up with the childhood abuse, one of my great escapes was to turn on the radio and listen to the words that were being sung or spoken. And any genre, whether it's rap or pop or folk music or bluegrass, whatever it is, it has such a powerful message in it if you just listen to the words and interpret them for your own situation. Growing up, I listened to a lot of Matchbox 20 and Three Doors Down and Disturbed and different rap artists and stuff, and the way that they can help me not feel alone and be able to relate to the words that they're singing, it's always inspired me. There's one of my favorite musicians, singer-songwriters, is an Irish singer-songwriter named Dermot Kennedy, and he's pretty fresh to the scene, but the way that he writes his songs is pure poetry, and I adore the way that he writes his music, the way he writes his lyrics. If you ever listen to him, you can clearly see that it's poetry, but it's poetry with a melody. And so that's really where my inspiration for the way I write comes from.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I think it's high time I start reading more of Edgar's work. I've heard quite an amazing great things about his poems. Okay, that want to lead me to ask you another question. And I want to ask you, what are the difficulties you've experienced so far in terms of marketing scars? And what are the medium you should utilize so far in terms of promoting this book?
Oh man, that's a pretty loaded question. As far as the struggles or the trials as being a self-published indie author, there are many, and I don't think they'll ever go away. I think there will always be struggles and challenges. Trying to put the book in the right order, giving it a nice flow, and giving it a good perception of understanding. There's a lot of challenges, and then there's always those little tiny hiccups that come, from publishing on like KDP with Amazon, where they'll want you to change one picture by 1 centimeter, and it's just seems ridiculous sometimes. And as far as marketing goes, I only stick with Facebook, and I don't market very much. When I do market, it's very vague. I don't try to promote it that much. And, in all honesty, I'm not trying to do this for the money. I'm trying to do this to help people who are struggling. And I've given away more books than I've sold, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of what I want to do. For anyone who can't afford the book, let me know. Send me an email and I will send you a copy, because I just want to help people, and I want them to know that they're not alone in this struggle and that they can relate, and that's my mission.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. I'd also love to know your idea about a particular subject, though this is somewhat might a little bit different from the interview question, but I want to know your thought about criticism in poetry. I've heard quite a lot of things about criticism in poetry, how it ought to be criticized. And I was going to ask you, poetry is not like other genre of literature, like fiction or non-fiction. And I was going to ask you, what's your idea, what's your thought about criticism in poetry?
Criticism for me, it's really in the eye of the beholder. I think a wise person is going to take insight from criticism. Poetry, it's up for interpretation. And when you get criticism from somebody, if it's on the poem itself, then you're getting, wisdom and knowledge on how they're perceiving that poem. And then there's constructive criticism, which to me, that's power for me. Like I said before, I struggle with spelling and grammar and stuff. So if somebody gives me criticism and corrects me where I've made a mistake, I take that as a blessing. And there's also, criticism that is just bullying. It's just somebody taking their emotions out on you when you've provoked a thought, or you've provoked something inside of them, a turmoil that they're struggling with or dealing with. And again, I think that criticism should be taken as insight and something to derive knowledge from.
Wow, thank you so much for your idea on criticism, because I just felt to get a notion about that. I really appreciate your thought about that. Okay, another thing I would like to ask you is that what sort of advice do you have for other poets who are still struggling to producing a book like yours? There are a lot of poets outside there who are still wondering on how to put their works together and to make a book out of it. What sort of advice do you have for poet in this category?
Well, the best advice that I could give is, if publishing your book is something that you really want and it's something that you really love, then just keep going and don't give up. We're going to struggle in every thing in our lives. We're going to have ups and downs no matter what. Ride the ups. Ride the ups because they are worth the downs. And if you're not struggling, are you really even trying to succeed? There's going to be struggles in our lives no matter what we do. So make sure you're doing what you love, and then keep going with the pursuit and don't stop. And when the struggles become obstacles that feel like there's something in your way, look at those obstacles as opportunities, because with those opportunities you get to grow, you get to learn something you didn't know, you get to figure out an easier way to do something, you get you get a knowledge to pass on to others and to help others pursue their dreams.
Yeah, Lucas, thank you so much for your advice, and I feel and hope that the viewers utilize it and find it quite amazing. Okay, I'd love to give you the opportunity to recite any poem that you feel like reciting from your book, Scars. Is there any poem you would like to perform or recite?
Yeah, I actually want to recite one that you read from the top down and the bottom up. And the poem's called Suicide Perspective. And I enjoy this poem because it gives two sides to suicidal ideation. People who are suicidal, there's some days that they think that they just can't make it, that they're just done with life and they're ready to give up. And then there's another side when they think that they can overcome this and they can fight through it. And that's really the message I was trying to portray, having one poem with two different meanings. And so I'll get started here. It says, Suicide Perspective. I can't go on, so don't tell me that I'm strong. Remember, when I feel hopeless, I'll feel sad for myself, as if it's a choice. I can't make myself feel better. Every breath that I take, trying to fight thoughts of suicide. My mind is overtaking my life. I'll make up my mind. I'll take away the pain. Suicide is selfish, so I'm sorry, but I believe I've been selfish with my sadness. The choice is mine to make. When the pain sets in, this is all I can take. Overwhelmed by depression, I will never be happy until I die. With my own will, my life I will take. Read bottom up. My life I will take, with my own will. Happy until I die. I will never be overwhelmed by depression. This is all I can take. When the pain sets in, the choice is mine to make. With my sadness, I've been selfish. And I'm sorry, but I believe that suicide is selfish. I'll take away the pain. I'll make up my mind. Overtaking my life. My mind is fighting thoughts of suicide. Every breath that I take, trying to make myself feel better as if it's a choice. I can't feel sad for myself when I feel hopeless. I'll remember. I am strong, so don't tell me that I can't go on.
Do you see that again? That is a deep recitation. That is absolutely deep. It is, it is evoking emotion. Just like that's just a glimpse of what Lucas has in his book. There are a lot of amazing poems in this book. Okay, I also want to ask you, do you have any, what are the things you would like the readers to know about Scars that we probably might not mention in this interview? If there's any information you want the readers or the viewers to know about Scars that you love to share with us, feel free to share with us.
Well, Peter, if there's anything that we haven't really touched on, it would just be to let your scars shine. Our scars make us who we are. They're battle scars and they're beauty marks. And don't be afraid of the stigma that surrounds mental health or mental health issues. Don't be afraid to speak. Let your testimony be heard. You could help somebody. You can help somebody relate so that they don't feel alone. This world's full of hate anyway, so we might as well be love. And, if you are struggling with mental health issues or depression or suicidal thoughts or anything like that, head over to LP Poetry on Facebook and send me a message, and I will gladly send you a copy at no cost to you. I just want to give my testimony away, and I want people to know that I love you, and that there is hope, and that there is healing. And you know, scars don't just come from the bad, they come from the good too. They are yin and yang. There is good in the bad just like there is bad in the good. And I just hope that, you know, through my book, you can find at least one poem to relate to, and know that you're not in this struggle alone, that I'm with you. And there are so many others that are with you too. And I hope that you just keep fighting, and you find a way to use your testimony as something that'll help heal others.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the things you've just shared with us. So viewers, here is Scars by Lucas Parks. You've just watched us spoke directly to the author, and this book is very amazing. Just as you've heard us discuss with the author, he has been able to share some of his life experience as at why he wrote the book Scar. Even from the title, one should be able to denote there's going to be a deep sort of poetry. And you know, if you would like to get a copy, I left a link in the description part of this interview for you to get a copy directly on Amazon. Or if you would like a free copy just like the author has denote, you can. I also left a link in the description part of this video that's to his email address, where you can email him if you would like to get a free copy directly from him. Thank you very much, Lucas, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature.
Peter, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate you and all that you're doing with your YouTube channel. And thank you to all the viewers who watch this and subscribe to your YouTube channel. I am eternally grateful for the opportunity to come on your show and speak. And, you know, many blessings to all of you. And thank you so much for letting me share my story as well as promote my book, Scars. God bless.